Welcome to season 2 of our podcast, where the theme is all about sustainability. And today I have Ross Caddens with me, Business Development Director from Siemens. Hi, Ross.
Hi, Nina. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And we're going to talk about how to achieve a sustainable digital thread today.
Looking forward to it.
So we're going to start with this more thoughtful note from Michael Porter, who gets us just to remember that businesses have got to reconnect company success with social progress. And of course, that's well talked about today. It's where I think everybody is in their mindset, even if they haven't got to the point where they're delivering that in the way they want to yet. So here we're talking about not philanthropy, but sustainability in a way that achieves economic success. And I'm sure everybody here will be pleased to hear that, because that is what we know will be sustainable, not just for the Earth's resources, but for companies. And boy, do we need that at the moment. So we're hoping that this doesn't become a marginal discussion. We're hoping that what these discussions actually tell us is how businesses are going to run. It's not about having a sustainability strategy and a business strategy. We're thinking that this is the new way that businesses will run, and this will give rise to the next major transformation of business thinking. And I should have said, for those of you who are just listening on the podcast, there is a slide deck that goes alongside this podcast today, which will be shared in the podcast notes. But hopefully both Ross and I will talk enough that you will be able to follow it in your minds if you can't see it in front of you now. So what do you think of that, Ross, of what Michael Porter's saying here?
Yeah, sustainability is obviously key. A lot of people talking about it, but I think there's many different facets to it, isn't there? There's obviously sustainability of the products that are being supplied, but one of the things that might be quite interesting to discuss later is around the skills and so on. A sustainable organization, bringing through new talent, thinking about what your organization itself is going to be like in the future, and making sure that's sustainable, that it can adapt and grow with and adapt with the times.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many strands to this, which nicely takes us on to our next slide, that it's all about systems thinking. This is not one thing, as we've already said. We're not talking today about the need to have a sustainability strategy. We're talking about the fact that sustainability should just be within normal business operations. And when you think about it in that way, it's a systems approach. And on the slide here, we've got 2 dots and a line that goes from dot A to dot B, and then another visual that shows many dots in lots of different places with many lines. And really, although that looks chaotic, it is just the reality of business today, isn't it?
Absolutely, and things don't go left to right quite as that left-hand picture describes. They're much more complicated than that, and many more organizations within departments within organizations collaborating, and extended supply chains and so on as well. And it's never quite as simple as designing a product or manufacturing a product sequentially. The continual dialogue and the cyclic nature of that is key.
Yeah, and that's it. We maybe have heard a lot about moving from a linear to a circular approach. And I did think about putting a circle on this slide, but actually the circular approach is more about closed loop thinking and making sure that we are taking accountability and responsibility for everything within a life cycle. That still sits within systems thinking, doesn't it? It's just because we're not showing it as a circle here, it is a bit more realistic as to what people will recognize in their businesses. Lots of points of interconnectivity going forwards, backwards, circular, going to the side in different directions. And it's when we're talking about being sustainable, again, both for a business perspective and with the world's resources, we're talking about capturing where all these interactions take place, aren't we?
Yeah, and understanding the relationships between them all as well, and why certain decisions have been made earlier on in the process, and what the impact of that was, and being able to review it and audit it and understand what we did and why we did it is becoming increasingly important, I think, with regulation and so on. And without some sort of systems-based approach, we really haven't got a chance.
Yeah, which takes us onto your great slide, the explosion of complexity. Love that.
Yeah, and I suppose if you go back a few years, people thought it was complex when we're having to look at, managing quality and cost and so on. But I think in recent years, some of these buzzwords have come to the fore more and more. People needing to develop smart and connected products. But in the context of this discussion, personalization and sustainability are key. We have many of our customers starting to ask us about how they can deliver their products in a personalized way, rather than filling warehouses full of product and hoping that's what people want to buy. I think consumers are a bit more discerning nowadays, maybe, and want something that's a bit more tailored to what they do. And for example, ourselves, Siemens is a manufacturer. We've got 200 plants around the world, one of them being in the UK here in Congleton, and they have really addressed this personalization challenge. They provide small electronic motor control devices. Well, sometimes they're even large electronic control devices, but they used to provide these products with a handful of variations, send them to a warehouse in Germany, and they were distributed around the world from there. But the recent set of products, they got something like 40,000 permutations that are available of that product. You can't fill a warehouse full of 40,000 different permutations and hope people are going to buy them. So they really needed to rethink the way that they produce these components. So they now build to order rather than build to stock. But also customers don't want to wait 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, for a product to be delivered. So they really needed to think about how they could build a product specific to an order very quickly and deliver that in a handful of days, rather than waiting months. So that required the use of a lot of digital twin tools and digital thinking around how they would connect with the supply chain and deliver those products. So personalization is something that's happening across the board.
And in that example, did that make that plant more efficient?
Well, in fact, it's probably one of the factors that contributes to some of these plants even staying open. So it's not even just about efficiency, it's about survival in many ways. All these Siemens plants need to compete with each other for efficiency, and so the work that was done in the UK could easily have been done elsewhere. So I think it is pretty fundamental to the future of some of these businesses that they adapt to that changing customer demand. And yeah, the Congleton plant has done exactly that.
Fabulous. So from this perspective of explaining to people what a digital, I've just realized I wasn't on full screen. So this might be easier for everyone to see now. So this is a take on what that sustainable digital thread could look like. And on one side, we've got the ESG reporting, the environmental, social and governance reporting that is becoming much more important, and many more organisations doing this, and many elements of this becoming statutory requirements. And then how that's linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which don't just focus on climate change. I know that climate gets a lot of airtime, but the area of sustainability is very wide ranging. And again, within the 17 goals that the UN have put out, it really covers the way that we live life and the way that business interacts with the world. So it's everything there, from poverty, people, not discriminating, looking after our waters, and then the things that we hear more often about climate. And businesses now have to really look at how they're building all of that into their business strategy. And under the magnifying glass here, we've got the elements that you and I, Ross, are probably more familiar with, which comes down to actually coming up with the problem statement in the business. Why, what problem is the business trying to solve in the world, and how is it trying to do that? And then doing that through a sustainable design process, which we know many organizations are already trying to do, but trying to make that easier for them to do it, probably by accelerating things like life cycle analysis that gives decisions in a way that helps with the multiple trade-offs that have to happen in these situations. And then, of course, being accountable for the whole supply chain. A much talked about area generally now, where I think it's even, we keep being reminded in the UK, we're not an industrial nation anymore. We actually outsource a lot of that. And that doesn't mean that we can outsource the responsibility. We have to look at the whole supply chain and recognize that we are moving our footprint to another place in the world, and that's still our responsibility. And reporting and governance, as we mentioned, will become a more stringent and more comprehensive area that business has to cope with. And alongside that, of course, you've got this growing external recognition that's got to come. More and more people, much more aware, much more educated, know where they want their money to be spent, know how they want companies to be operating. So that external recognition, much more important. And of course, the internal support, how these projects get financed, how that becomes part of the ongoing growth of the business, fundamental. So when you see it like that, Ross, does that make sense to you?
It does, and I think one of the key words there is that life cycle piece, the analysis. So you really got to be thinking about some of these goals very early on in the process. You can't, design or deliver a bad product and then somehow retrospectively make it sustainable. You've really got to be thinking about that whole life cycle right from the start. The specifications and the targets and so on are key. So I like the magnifying glass graphic there, because I think that having a focus on those areas is absolutely key. But interesting what you're saying about the external recognition as well, with Twitter and so on. Any mistakes that are made by organizations can be very quickly highlighted all around the world, and the sort of reputational damage of that can be quite significant.
And this is so important now, isn't it? And adds much more complexity to what were never simple situations in the first place, but now, but complexity for the right reasons. And also complexity that, if we get it right, can lead to real competitive advantage. And that's what you found from a Siemens perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, these are the sort of three areas that we think help bring a competitive advantage to our customers. And everybody will no doubt have heard about the digital twin, but from our perspective, the key word in that top one there is the comprehensive. We need to think about everything. Design of the product, the quality, the cost, but also some of those sustainability KPIs that we just mentioned. And the comprehensive digital twin is a way to capture all that and make sure that does flow through that development life cycle that we just talked about. And I mentioned some of the examples about personalization as well. This is personalization of the end product itself, but also personalizing the way that you deploy solutions like ours, whether it's in the cloud or on-premise or SaaS or whatever it may be. And finally, we talk about our openness as well. So when we talk a little bit later on about some of the solutions, it's not Siemens only that we're dealing with here. We want to be as integrated with other applications and solutions as possible to make sure that digital thread that you mentioned is maintained, so that we do have that traceability of what we've done and why we've done it, and what the impact was on the sustainability and so on of the end product.
So for those people who might not have ever heard of a digital twin, what is the competitive advantage that comes from that. And I'll move on because you might want to talk about it around this slide.
Yes, I will. So yeah, comprehensive really, because it spans the whole life cycle. So the first piece in green there is the digital twin of the product, and the graphic shows a 3D model there. But actually, as products get smarter, more and more electronic devices and so on within each of these products, it's more about the electronics and the software and everything that goes up to build whatever the product is. And more and more, you see products being delivered with complementary apps and so on. IoT type devices that can report on how they're performing. So all that needs to be thought about earlier on. The product that you're delivering, what are the sort of ecosystem of apps and utilities and things that may be available with that. So the digital twin of the product is not really just that 3D piece that you see in the picture. It is everything that goes to make up what in that case an aircraft or a vehicle. Vehicles now 70 ECUs, control units on each of these, all of those with printed circuit boards and connectors and wire harnesses and software loaded on. Very complicated set of information that you need to understand, really, because that is the full definition of the product that you're going to build.
And at that point, when you're doing all of that, is that where the life cycle analysis work would start?
It would have to, yeah. So the specification piece there is critical. You've really got to be thinking very early on about if you're going to take a systems approach, systems engineering, or what we might call model-based systems engineering, getting all that understood very early on, so that cascades down through the various disciplines in the organization, be it mechanical, electrical, software, manufacturing, service, sustainability, cost, all sorts of different domains need to know what the specification is, what the targets are that they're all driving towards.
And those targets are so important, aren't they? Because it's at this point, as you mentioned earlier, if you've not got your sustainable targets in at this point, it's very hard to retrospectively go back and change that, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's always the same, isn't it? The shift left kind of idea. The earlier you get these things sorted in the life cycle, the cheaper it's going to be to correct, and you don't want to find that you've made a fundamental mistake in your system design when you get down to some of those later phases. So yeah, absolutely.
And shift left has created a challenge for organizations because of how they traditionally cost things. So yeah, the big expense normally would be further down the line, wouldn't it? Which actually, even as I'm saying it, makes no sense whatsoever. So why we ever thought that was a good idea, I don't really know. To get everything sorted out up front and make sure that you're hitting your targets and you're doing it before you're actually making anything tangible, surely is the way to do it.
It is, absolutely. And in fact, it's maybe a bit subtle in the graphic, but those digital twin circles overlap for a reason. And I think that's exactly the sort of thing that you're alluding to there, that in the past, the engineering department did engineering, manufacturing did manufacturing, production did production, and almost, I wouldn't say didn't care about each other, but we're focused on their job. But now I think there's a realization that there's got to be a bit more concurrent thinking in what you're doing. Production, manufacturing, planning should be involved in some of the design phases, because ultimately the product does have to be made, and there may be an opportunity to influence the design based on manufacturability or serviceability and so on. So that's really what we are driving towards with these twins intersecting like that integration and that sort of overlap between the domains that might typically have been disconnected and the sort of traditional over-the-wall thinking between engineering and manufacturing, and trying to break that down, because that is where some of the costs and some of the challenges are introduced.
And this brings in the real people side of this. It's making sure that those early teams come together with everybody for the complete life cycle needs to be. Now, as we know, they don't have to be 100% involved all the way through the journey, but we do have to have systems that allow them to make sure that the requirements are set, the goals are set, that the responsibility and accountability is understood by everybody, and then a way of tracking progress as it goes through the different stages.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody having their say from their perspective. You know, there's many different organizations maybe with different perspectives that should be considered in that whole life cycle, manufacturing planning down through production into, you know, when the product's in service. And I think what's key from this comprehensive digital twin is the blue arrows that are going back. So, you know, this is what really enables some of that IoT, Internet of Things type capability. So information coming back from the real product in service and helping to influence the changes or the future versions of the product based on the real world utilization of that product in service. You know, is it actually behaving as we expected it to behave? If not, why not? And being able to sort of navigate some of those decisions that were made early on and understand maybe we might have made assumptions that were incorrect, and we want to adapt that for future products.
And this is a big part of this is real impact analysis, isn't it? And with the new roles that are appearing in lots of organizations coming from new sustainability teams, new digital teams, so moving away, even engineering is changing a lot, isn't it? Being an engineer when you had a drawing board versus being a digital engineer today is significantly different, and these different roles and the ownership and who drives these projects in this way now becomes much more important, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about how the end product is going to be used as well can have a big effect on the way that product is designed. You know, servitization business models, outcome-based models, that might mean that you think about how you design your product quite differently compared to a traditional, you know, selling of an asset of some sort. We've been working with a company lately, and they want to have their products connected to the internet and dialing back to the you know, the head office, and they think that they can avoid call outs. They do something like 300,000 call outs a year, and they believe that about 60% of those are not necessary.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a cost saving to the company in terms of service engineers. There's a CO2 angle, sustainability angle there. You don't have those vehicles on the road traveling to maintain a product which actually, as it turned out, didn't actually need a service engineer in the first place. So, you know, making these products smart and having them connected to some diagnostics tools and giving the end user feedback, maybe via an app of some sort where they can do some rudimentary analysis and fixing themselves is pretty powerful, really, for the business in terms of its bottom line, but also the CO2 type impact as well.
And everyone wins, which is, you know, makes these conversations very compelling. And I'm hoping that for our listeners, they really feel that as well, that there are situations here that not only help the planet, which we desperately need to do, but actually they're really important to sustain our businesses going forward as we move into change. We're already in a situation where every business has been struggling because of the pandemic, but every business was looking to change anyway. The world was changing. Our digital impact was already creating significant change. And all we're doing here is joining a few more dots together, aren't we, to say, by using this system approach, then we can look at so many of these different agendas in one go and move away from, actually, this team have got this team have got that, this team have got the other. Actually, all those agendas, the deliverables, the things they want to do are always connected, and we make it more difficult for ourselves by separating them within an organization.
Yep. And yeah, and I think the pandemic has been quite interesting from that point of view, hasn't it? That it's forced people to maybe challenge some of those thoughts that they had before, that they couldn't do certain things, or certain things weren't suitable for their business, and that they've had to confront some of that and maybe break down some of those preconceived ideas about how they develop their products or test it, or whatever it may be. So yeah, that maybe a slight silver lining out of the pandemic, that it's making business maybe accelerate some of that digital thinking that they may be being ignoring to some extent.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any silver lining really, is there? But it's definitely challenged us in a way where we had no choice. So before all this happened, people still had a choice, and then we were put in a situation where we had no choice. And it's amazing what you change when you've got no choice.
Yeah.
And really, it amazes me that we've not got to that position with sustainability, the climate agenda, just looking, as Greta keeps reminding us, our house is burning. It's an emergency, but we still seem to think we've got a choice.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree.
So it's, and now we've got up a slide which talks through the Siemens accelerator portfolio, and I know, Ross, you're keen not to turn this into a sales pitch, but we wanted to show our listeners that this is not new. We're not waiting for technology to catch up here. All this stuff already exists. It's just now that perhaps it's easier to connect these things so that we get this very important data backbone that needs to run through this.
Exactly, yes. And I think that was really the idea of this slide, to show how many different domains can come together with tools like the Siemens Accelerator portfolio, covering many different domains. So on the left-hand side, mechanical, electrical, and simulation, underpinned by the Teamcenter and MindSphere platforms at the top, that give us that thread. Really, without a backbone, a database backbone, you really don't have a thread. You've still got a collection of point solutions. And over to the right hand side, the software and the apps that I mentioned, the product intelligence stuff, the connectivity back to the physical asset and understanding how it's performing, and the manufacturing execution on the shop floor, and towards the bottom there, the manufacturing planning. So all of those key domains: design, simulation, software, electronics, manufacturing planning and execution, and all of that really sort of coming together is what breaks down some of those silos and helps to deliver that sort of systems thinking, that we don't focus on individual silos. And just looking at it more specifically from a sort of sustainability angle, thinking of some of the things that we can maybe apply, new technologies that help in the mechanical space with, lightweighting, be it additive manufacturing or composites, using composites in the product. All of that can help deliver lighter, stronger products. You could even use additive for repairing existing tooling and so on. So maybe a forging die or something like that may have previously been scrapped. We can use additive techniques to add material on, then remachine it. So all of these things are good from a sustainability point of view, eliminating and reducing waste as much as possible. Some of the collaboration tools even that we've got with VR. So many organizations now using virtual reality to have design reviews, rather than having everybody in a room, get everybody into a virtual environment and have a really thorough review of the product design as it's evolving. Electronics as well, optimizing the efficiency of the electronic systems with the Mentor suite. We'll come to another example in a moment about simulation. So this is also thinking about the systems and the specifications, making sure that the product and the architecture that we agree for the product is optimal. We're using the right components and so on. But long before we get to any physical tests or any physical product at all, doing this all in the virtual environment is key. Factory planning as well, so a lot of tools that allow us to assess the energy efficiency of the production facility down to the cell level and up at the sort of plant level as well, and even on individual machine tools, making sure that we're not using too much energy in machining processes and optimizing that. So there's a lot of different aspects that kind of come out from some of the core capabilities of the accelerator portfolio that had helped to add on sort of benefits in efficiency and energy consumption and so on, that would influence the life cycle, the sustainability life cycle of the product.
And at any point, any sustainable target in terms of replacing resources, natural resources that are being used, that an organisation now knows they've got to discontinue or wind down, or the impact analysis of maybe operating in a certain part of the world and disrupting soil or forestry or anything like that. We could be talking anything here, couldn't we? Because all we're saying is that this is a framework that allows you to really focus on what that problem statement is, and then collaboratively work along that and figure out what your inputs are going to be and then what your outputs are as a result of that. That's really all we're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably taking credit for some of the stuff that the individual engineers and so on are actually doing. For example, the CAM toolpath stuff, it maybe will not get reported up from the machine shop that they've reduced the amount of energy that's being consumed because they've optimized the toolpaths and so on. But I think that's going to be something that organizations will want to do increasingly in the future, is identify these areas where there has been that kind of saving and report them up and use that in their sustainability reports to the board and so on, that will become increasingly important.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that there is always so much hidden stuff, and just the ability of people to come forward and say, actually, I can quantify this in the right way, or have the data that is necessary so that it can flow through to a report, is the only thing that hinders them, really. It's not that they weren't doing the action in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So now we've got a couple of case studies here, which you really nicely picked out, ones that look at energy efficiency or sustainability in a couple of different ways. So it would be great if you talk us through these.
Yeah, so Picanol, they produce weaving looms, and they've been using our products for many years. But in this case, they've been using SimCenter, AMASIM, which is used very early on in the design process to think about the various elements. You can see from that sort of middle graphic where it says co-simulate with SimCenter and 3D Motion. They've got the red and green and purple areas there are sort of the system building blocks, and we've got a library of these blocks, motors, valves, pneumatic cylinders, and so on, that we have sort of representations of, mathematical models of, and we can connect them together to create a sort of virtual description of the system and see how it's going to perform. So the outcome for them was that they've actually ended up creating one of the most energy efficient looms available on the market by doing that upfront analysis, using the simulation tools, doing those trade-offs that you mentioned earlier on, and then flowing that through into the sort of detailed design, but on the basis that you have a good understanding of how your system's going to behave, sometimes call it a behavioral model, and really getting a view on where the energy consumption is going to be, what it is, and looking at the different use cases and the cycles that the loom is going to go through, and then simulating all of that. So interesting example of very early on optimization of the energy efficiency, and to be able to deliver one of the world's most efficient looms, I guess, is testament to the quality of that upfront simulation.
Fantastic. The most energy efficient weaving loom. And not everyone can say that, can they?
Who knew? Yeah.
And then we've got another one about energy optimization. And I guess it's no surprise that these are ready, available case studies, because energy optimization is one of the easiest, well, don't want to use that term, but it's an area that everybody is naturally focusing on, as if it is one that naturally will give cost savings when you look at trying to take the waste out of what you're doing.
Yeah, and lots of benefits there, and you see, reducing the fuel used in that kiln by 10%. So that has lots of impact, doesn't it? The bottom line in terms of the cost to the business, but also the CO2 impact and so on. And really just using a similar set of tools in this example, but reducing the fuel consumption there. This is using star CCM in this case, so looking at CFD, computational fluid dynamics, to analyze how that kiln is heating and how the burners are operating, and looking at the efficiency of the internals of the heating system within that kiln, and maximizing the heat output for the energy that's gone in. So many examples really, I suppose, just picked out a couple here that can show the benefits of that upfront digital analysis and optimizing it in the 3D world long before you've ever produced any sort of component.
And then I think this is one of my favorites because it just shows you, and I just love that line, 500 evaluations in 4 hours.
Exactly, yeah, a great example from an aerospace example in this case, but each one of those blue dots represents a simulation that was done. In here we're trading off the panel weight and various other characteristics, the thickness of the individual skins on the fuselage. Yeah, so as you say, Nina, 500 iterations. Traditional techniques an engineer would not have been able to run that many, and certainly not in that amount of time. And they would have used their gut instinct, their best guess at which one of those blue dots might give the right set of results. But as you can see, there's quite a variety of results there. And in this case, we've been able to reduce the panel weight by 43%. So that's great. That product in itself is lighter, but if you think of the whole fuselage and all the components coming together, and of course, if the whole fuselage is lighter, then some of the other products can be lighter. Maybe the engine doesn't need to be able to provide quite so much thrust to get the aircraft off the ground. Maybe the landing gear can be optimized in some way to reduce some weight because it doesn't have to bear so much load. So the knock-on effect of some of these things can be quite significant. So in this case, using HEATS to do the optimization, design of experiments optimization to find the optimal set of characteristics, that's helped this individual fuselage section, but the bigger effect on the system, we keep mentioning the system, but the system itself can be quite significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And then here we talk about something that I think actually when we spoke about this last time, and I said, oh yeah, 3D printers were something that people built in the garage, and then you told me you had one in your office.
I do, it's there. That's right. So yeah, you get addicted to 3D printing maybe, but what we're showing here really is the end-to-end offering that we have with the Siemens portfolio. And what this is really showing is that 3D printing and additive manufacturing maybe is something that's relatively new. And I think a lot of the tools that have been used by our customers in the past have been disconnected. And although each of those disconnected tools has maybe done a good job at design for additive manufacturing or build simulation, what they were struggling with was the connectivity, the interoperability between all those different tools. So we're now doing this all in the accelerator portfolio, NX and SimCenter, essentially both the same product, flowing from left to right all the way through that additive life cycle. And bringing in some new techniques like design validation. So, looking at spring back and residual stresses and distortion and so on within the additive part. But that's new areas, but also, falling back on some of our traditional areas like the subtractive manufacturing CAM to remove some of the support structures and so on. But key thing really is doing this all in one tool, as it says, the unified solution, idea to part, the sort of left to right. And Siemens, I mentioned Siemens as a manufacturer. We've bought a company called Materials Solutions in Worcester in the UK, and their business is additive manufacturing. So they are adopting this kind of left to right process as well for their in-house production of the additive parts that they produce for many industries, motorsport, aerospace, and so on.
And this area of additive manufacturing is much more important when we're thinking about build to order, isn't it? You know, where you have to be really targeted, you have to know what you're going to do, and the ability then to make something and say, yeah, that does the job, or even actually allow for some machine learning to say, and allow the machine to tell you, it doesn't need to look like this, it could look like this, which adds another dynamic that it felt a bit sci-fi years ago when you were looking at this. I remember going to one demonstration where they gave us all something that looked, I don't even know what it looked like, I can't even describe it, but they said, that's a new bottle opener. And it's because they hadn't designed the bottle opener in the way we would design it. They let the machine say, given the parameters you've given me, this is the most efficient way of having a bottle opener.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what that generative engineering piece is about. And that's why you get some of those crazy shapes that you might see there. You know, traditionally, when I was on a drawing board, you wouldn't have dreamt of coming up with a design like that, mainly because you couldn't manufacture it. So now with additive, you know, there's a whole new world of geometries that you can actually create and print. I mean, even to the extent that a hole doesn't need to be round anymore. You know, in fact, it's easier in additive manufacturing if you don't produce round holes, if you produce more of a Gothic arch kind of shape because of the way that the product builds up. So it totally turns traditional sort of thinking around design on its head. Generative design will come up with new shapes. What you can actually make itself is totally different. And that example there, the multidisciplinary generative engineering piece, that duct thing there is actually the duct inside the HP printers. So we've made, I think it's something like 30% more efficient in the cooling of the build area within the Hewlett-Packard printing machines. But it's kind of interesting that we've used the tools and we're using 3D printers to produce that duct that goes into the 3D printers itself. So that's kind of a real cyclic thing going on there. But the key thing is breaking down some of those silos that we talked about before. You got the design and the engineering world gradually sort of transitioning into manufacturing planning, and then sort of transitioning into the sort of production phase as well, all in that sort of joined up way, which is really what we're looking at in everything that we bring to market nowadays is what is the end-to-end journey like, because we have that breadth of solution that we talked about earlier on with the accelerator portfolio.
And the world needs this, doesn't it? This new way of thinking. We can't have situations going forward where one team will say, well, we don't do it that way, we've got no experience of doing it that way, we can't do it, we don't know this will work out, and they shed so much doubt on a situation that it means that the decision makers start to worry, and the whole thing ends up feeling quite negative. These situations have to be led by teams of people who are fully committed to doing something different for a future space, don't they?
Yeah. I think what the organizations have got to worry about is that, you know, if they don't embrace this kind of thinking, their competitors will. So, you know, it really is something we need to make sure that UK manufacturing is embracing this kind of thinking, and in many cases it is. So, positive story about this sort of end-to-end thinking of the digital twins and the digital threads, and this is a great example with the additive story here.
Brilliant. And here is just for everybody listening, there's just a slide here that just wraps up the accelerator portfolio, but I think more or less we've covered that. So very keen in this series of podcasts to make sure that we're leaving some tangible actions for you all to be able to create your sustainable digital thread. So here we have a slide that has got 3 quite big actions on there, and we're just going to bring the podcast to an end with these actions. So number 1 is to understand how your organization's environmental, social and governance strategy aligns with the digital strategy, or if you already started one, your digital thread that runs through the business. This is so important because of data. The data that's generated through your digital thread needs to be relevant, accurate, and used everywhere. It is such a barrier to change sometimes, the fact that data is not, can't be relied on, is in so many different places, and people don't trust it. So making sure that this data business backbone is there, so that you understand throughout the system how the data is going to be turned into information and decision making and reporting. Really, I think this is a major acceleration point. What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting just looking at this, just thinking about the alignment that you mentioned between the digital strategy, digital thread, and the ESG, and almost, you know, ESG almost ought to be another strand within the digital thread, shouldn't it? And you shouldn't just be aligned, but they ought to be woven together almost, so that you know, everything that you do around your digital strategy and the threads and the twins and all the other digital things that we mentioned, you know, the environmental, social, and governance stuff's got to be integral to all of that. You can't really separate them anymore, because if you're going to have good decision making and reporting and so on, as we said at the start, you've got to think about those specifications and KPIs and so on as early as you possibly can.
And as we've talked about all the way through this, it is a system approach, which means collaboration is critical to ensuring that waste in your internal processes are minimised. Looking at how your different teams work together is also critical. It's like the data, it's just as critical, really, because you need to make sure that your people are organised in a way that it is seamless for them to work collaboratively. And then you have to challenge whether your digital thread or digital strategy is helping that collaboration or hindering it. And that's so important, because your employees must be able to do what you ask them to do. And that sounds like a stupid statement, but in so many organizations, they can't. And that infrastructure that you give them to work within must enable that accelerated innovation and fail fast. When we're talking about sustainable design and life cycle analysis, you're talking about a world of trade-offs. These are not simple things to approach and make decisions on. They take a lot of analysis and people going, this is, when everything is considered, this is the greater good path that we can take here. It's really not easy, is it?
No, and you're right. And if we're hindering people's day-to-day tasks, then they're not going to embrace this kind of thinking, are they? So we've got to make sure that whatever we provide to the different individuals in the organization, that we're improving their work life and the way that they're using various different tools, or at least if there is a bit of a shift left, maybe we're putting a bit more emphasis in the upfront analysis. It might put more workload on one department, but we realize that there's a bigger piece at play, and the downstream benefits of that will be, you know, a net gain to the organization. So clarity around what we're doing and why we're doing it is key, and if there is any hindering, maybe then we understand why that is and what the benefit would be to the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'll just move it up a little bit. Can the executive teams and shareholders follow the product development progress easy? Can the decision makers monitor costs and trade-offs? Can you contribute and sign off progress without holding several meetings? And, you know, this may have got easier in more recent times, but I imagine for most people, the sign-off process is still pretty laborious, and we've got to make sure that this becomes value add and not just totally draining for everyone involved. And it goes back to what we were saying in point one, really, the data and how the data flows through everything we've been talking about today is so important. And if you get that right, reporting from that data source should be automatic.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's one of the things that we're pushing with the team center angle here. So a lot of these processes and workflows and so on being managed by team center means exactly that, Nina, that the reporting and so on is automated, so we don't have people running about trying to generate Excel reports and spreadsheets and so on about where we're up to in a life cycle and where we are against our various KPIs. It all just falls out of the system because we've been planning that right from the start. That system's thinking, again, we know what we're going for, we know what the various steps involved are, and we can track the progress against that, whatever discipline it is, engineering or manufacturing or production.
And we know there's a lot more than 3 points to create a sustainable digital thread, but these 3 points, if achieved, actually will take you a huge way there. So of course there's a lot more involved in this, and when you're on your own, oh no, I'm going to say it, journey. Oh, I said I wasn't going to say it, but okay, when you're there doing your own thing, then you will come up with the personalizations that you need to run through this. But we're pretty sure that this will give you a great start. And if you want to continue these conversations with either Ross or myself, then you can contact Ross directly. If you're not looking at the slide set now, if you go to the slide set on the podcast notes, you'll see the details for Ross there, and also the details of how you can talk to me or talk about anything that we've discussed in today's podcast and presentation. So we hope that's given you food for thought and something to work on. We'd love for you to engage with us. So if you don't agree with us or you've got your own experiences, please let's hear them. And we're more than happy to connect and keep the conversation going. So thanks very much for joining me today, Ross.
Thanks very much, Nina. Pleasure. Good to speak to you. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions regarding Siemens or any of the topics there, let me know.
Brilliant. Okay.